And for many, the answer will come back that if you die, your partner, your beneficiary, will get half, and if they die, the kids will get nothing.
That's gone.
And that probably isn't on the plan really for most people. Since I left corporate life, in just one property transaction, just one, in a 2-year period, in 24 months, we doubled my pension that
Yeah.
had taken 24 years. That's the power if you know what you're doing.
Welcome to another episode of Property Lunch with Giuseppe. Now, today it's a special day because I have a special guest. The special guest is called Mark Stokes. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Very well, Giuseppe. Very well indeed. And thank you for inviting me on your show.
You're very, very welcome, and thank you for accepting. So Mark is, let's say you wear different hats. You know, your expertise spans across different areas in property, and not only in property, but more like in businesses. Your main expertise, I would say, is commercial to residential conversions, but you are well known in the world of pension, especially SSAS pension. Now, we're going to cover a little bit. I'm going to ask you a few questions about commercial conversions and what you can do at the moment in the current climate. But also I want to explain to the audience as well, what is pension and why we can use pension to purchase properties. So if you can go back in time and tell me, for example, when you started out in property, what was the reason to choose property over other businesses?
Okay, so my background, I've had a 30-year background as an engineer in property. I've been involved in the development of over 3 million square feet of commercial real estate over my corporate career. And my corporate career lasted from my degree in construction in 1992 through to my eventual exit in 2015. So real estate and construction and understanding all the risks and running business in both of those spheres had been a core part of my business and my life for a quarter of a century. But it got to a point in 2014 where, with 4 children, I was also a board member of 7 different companies. And the more successful I was going to be in business, there would be an 8th and a 9th, and I was seeing less and less of my children. So I decided to leave corporate life, and because I'd got such a background in construction and real estate, it just made sense. It was a passion of mine, property anyway, and investing. So I worked with my partner at the time. I'd been working alongside Nigel Green since the late 90s. So we joined forces again. So we've had an unabridged 23-year joint venture really in doing all things property and construction. So I've got a lot of buy-to-lets, a lot of HMOs, but I've very seldom bought HMOs. I create HMOs, I create buy-to-lets predominantly, and I create buy-to-lets through commercial to residential conversions and land developments and new build. So that's a bit about my background.
Okay, and you wrote different books as well. One of them, I remember, was called Commercial to Residential. And
Yeah.
I ask you, what's the vision that you have when you see like an empty building, an empty commercial building? What is the clicks in your mind and think like, okay, I can convert this one into such and such?
Yeah, it's the repurposing of what's there. I'm a risk manager at heart. I trained as an engineer. I then became a business owner, a business, a managing director, a chief executive. But I'm always looking at a risk. So it's always that balance of opportunity versus the risk of doing so. And quite often planning is right in the crosshairs there. Just because you could doesn't mean you should. So I'm not a big risk taker. I've been a corporate troubleshooter for 25 years of my 30-year business life. And I understand what doing things wrong or out of sequence or being too aggressive on risk. I understand what the consequences of that can be. So when I'm looking at a property, I'm looking through a very specific business owner, business investment lens
Mhm.
of what could you do, what could you achieve, what are the risks that be associated, what is the timescales, what is the capital, and also what is the societal impact. I'll give
Mhm.
you an example of that latter one, which is very rarely talked about. We're doing a large development in Crawley. It's
Mhm.
about 13 million GDV. It's 53 apartment commercial conversion, and we're also putting a new floor on the top of it as well. Now, as property developers, and this is where I think property developers sometimes can be a bit self-centric. As property developer, we can give each other a happy clappy high five and say how we've taken this drugs den of a ugly building and converted it into beautiful apartments. But what have we done to the societal issue? The societal issue is street homelessness, habitual drug taking, um, and all we've done is kick the can down the road. We've said to society, you sort that problem out. It's no longer in our backyard, and we'll focus on the building. So what we've also got an interest in a business called Cornerstone Place, which takes commercial property and helps create homeless shelters. And we want to create 10 million homeless bed nights each year.
Wow.
So that's a separate business investment we've got. And you could look at that as akin to carbon offsetting. You know, I'm no longer just focused on converting buildings.
Mhm.
I want to create social impact. And if I can't do that in the building we're creating, we will also create this through our other vehicle to help, in this case, alleviate street homelessness. So
Yeah,
hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of my moral compass bearing on in business.
I love that. I love that. There is a big misconception as well from people seeing, even to myself, when I post on social media that I'm buying more properties, I'm converting more property, I'm doing refurbs, and there were some comments on my profile. I remember saying like, "Are you not depriving from the opportunity to young families to get their own home?" And I don't see a connection there. Sometimes there's big misconception about property developers and property investors. They are taking away houses from families when in reality we're giving back to the society. So I love your explanation there.
Yeah, I mean, many of the buildings that we've taken literally are derelict, and when you've got family homes which have very close to them a building which has fallen into disrepute, I mean, we tend to acquire pretty substantial properties. The one I mentioned is about 25,000 square feet, so big properties. But you've got children playing next to areas of habitual drug use. You know that's not great. We tend to operate at the lower 2 to 3 bedroom new build houses, and generally in the southeast. Or if we're creating apartments in commercial to residential conversions, they're generally studios or one-bed apartments.
Mhm.
So they're generally all covered by Help to Buy if we're selling,
Yeah.
or if we're or holding them. So we want them to be readily accessible by and affordable in the marketplace, and that's a really important part to us. We've just secured a nice piece of land in between Guildford and Farnham in Surrey, and that's a new build for 9 residential houses, and they are 5 2-bed, 3 bed and a
Mhm.
4-bed. So you can see the ratios. They're down at the, should we say, the bottom end of the market, but I would say actually the area that is in most need. And I think that's our differentiator. We're not trying to build penthouses and 5-bedroom
Yeah.
detached. That's nothing wrong with those, but it's just not
It's
our
not your
business
model.
model.
Yeah. And okay, if I can make a comparison now, what is your biggest GDV project that you've done so far? Gross development value. What was the biggest so far?
The biggest at the moment is about 19.5 million.
Mhm.
It's a 57 apartment.
Wow.
It's a part demolition and new build and a part commercial conversion in Hanwell in West London. So this is a 28,000 square foot commercial building. We've demolished about 21.5 to 22,000 square feet of that, completely demolished it, put a brand new foundation system in, 4-story reinforced concrete frame structure. We've just completed the cladding. We're almost watertight. And then we're doing an internal fit out of the existing portion that is staying. And there'll be 57 apartments, and some will be sold, some will be held, and some will be shared ownership as well.
Okay.
So that's the largest, and our spread will be anything from 1 million GDV to 20 million GDV.
That is your biggest. And now if you go back to your very first commercial conversion project, what was it? Because it's very easy to forget when you do a lot, to forget where you started. And I want to as well to share your story. What was your very first project?
So first one was in Colchester, and it was a building which about 10,000 square feet, and it had already got permitted development. This is going back to 2015, 2016. It already got permitted development for 8 apartments. But these 8 apartments, were each about 92 to 94 square meters each. They were very, very big apartments, palatial, one would say. In fact, they were so large that a sales price per square foot would compete with a 2 to 3 bed new build. So really it had no place in the market. So we acquired it, conditional, subject to permitted development, and we resubmitted permitted development, and we halved the size of the units, and we went for 16 units, each of around about sort of 42 to 48 square meters each. Really nice scheme. GDV was about 2.7 million, and we sold all of those units. So that was the first one when I exited corporate life. Of course, I've done power stations and data centers of hundreds of millions in value well before that, but that was the first commercial to residential. And that was a really interesting point, actually, when we secured the funding for that from the banks. The banks wanted to understand what our expertise was, and would we be okay with what was around about a £1 million construction package. So I could give them great examples of construction contracts which I'd negotiated and ran, which ranged from £1 million through to around about 400 million over the years. For, as I say, power stations and renewable energy and data centers and things, but still had to convince them of my core skills in managing what was, probably the lowest construction value of £1 million that I'd ever been involved in. So that was an interesting journey of discovery with the banks, and so it continues.
It never ends. Right. So if we switch now to, so we talk about commercial conversion. Now, commercial is quite linked a lot with pension. You wrote a few books on SSAS pensions. I have 2 of them right here with me. And I know you wrote just another one right now. Do you have one there?
Yes, I wrote another one. Just happen to have it here, Property and SSAS Secrets.
Yeah.
So that's really a combination of the first one, but it's all things you can do with property with SSAS, either your SSAS or somebody else's SSAS. So that's the thickest, most detailed book that I've done yet on the subjects of SSAS and property.
Oh, brilliant. Can you give our audience a little bit of explanation of what is a SSAS, what is a SIPP, why pension, with property?
Tell you the reason why it sparked my interest first, if I may.
Yeah.
Back in 2015, when I left corporate life, one of my commitments to my wife and to myself, my mandate, if you like, was to take control of my personal economy. That means take control of everything. I'd been very well looked after in corporate life, but I still just had that one role. So I wasn't particularly resilient, even though I was involved in building data centers, which were highly resilient infrastructure. So I felt the need to make sure I was highly resilient moving forward. And the one thing that I had to take control of in order to be in control of my entire economy was my pension. Now, I had multiple pensions because I'd worked across 30 odd countries and quite a complex structure. So I had lots of pensions, but I was 44 going on 45 when I retired from corporate life. So still, a good 10 years in today's terms away from being able to access my 25%, tax-free drawdown.
Yeah.
So I set out on a journey to understand what options I had. I didn't know the four letters SSAS, SAS. I didn't know those that acronym. So I did my research. I'm pretty intense at doing my due diligence. I won't procrastinate. I'll do it quick and move on. I very much believe in start with version 1 to get with version 10. You've got to just make a start and evolve. And after doing all that due diligence, I decided, well, if I've got all these questions to ask, there must be other people. So hence, I was able to use the SSAS pensions book to scratch the 35-year itch of becoming an author that I'd had. So back to your question of what is a SSAS and why might it be relevant to you? Well, SSAS is a way at any age, as long as you're over 18, where you can take control of your pension. A SSAS is a trust. You can have between 1 and 11 trustees in a SSAS, and you make the investment decisions. And that's the important thing there. You're not putting your funds into a fund manager, into a Hargreaves Lansdown, into a SIPP, or one of the many other options out there. I find personally that it's very low on charges. So the cost of transaction, it enables you to do, a SSAS enables you to do everything a SIPP does and more. So it just worked for me. And I'm not here to sell anybody a SSAS. I can't, I'm not regulated. I'm not an advisor. I'm just a regular guy who has just taken the bull by the horns and decided to get on and take control of their personal economy. And one of my big passions is commercial property, whether it be to hold commercial property or to convert commercial property to residential or other use classes. And that is actually one of the things you can do with a SSAS. So let's just have a look at some of the very basic high-level things you can do with a SSAS, a small self-administered scheme. And this is generally often referred to as a director's pension, because you need to have a business to be able to set up a SSAS. You need to be a director of a business, trading company.
Does it have to be a limited company, LLP, or doesn't matter?
It can be an LLP. Normally, it's a limited company.
Okay.
But it can't be a sole trader. It's either a limited company or an LLP. So the type of things you can do once you've got your trust set up, probably with a practitioner or a corporate trustee, because we need experts to help us guide us through this process. So once the funds land in your bank account from a transfer from your pension or your employee or employer contributions each year, and you have a lifetime allowance, which is index linked, but it's index linked to just over 1 million at the moment. You can do a number of things. So you can still invest, should you wish, into the stock market. You can invest in crypto, into bonds, into tracker funds. So you can do all of that, should you wish. That's personally not my strategy, but you can definitely do that. You could buy gold bullion, so you can look at ETFs and lots of things there. But you can also acquire commercial property. And I like that. I like a hard underlying asset class. And the great thing, as many people understand about owning property, is that you can create leverage. It's an asset class that the banks will lend. Now, the leverage rules are slightly different for a SSAS, but you can still create leverage in a SSAS. So if I were to acquire a commercial property in my SSAS pension, I could still get bank lending. I could still get a bank mortgage. So that's one thing you can do. You can acquire commercial property in cash if your SSAS is big enough. You can acquire it with leverage, but you can only leverage your SSAS pension to up to 50% of net asset fund value. You can do something very special, and you can't do this with any other pension. Can't do it with a SIPP. It's something called a loan back. Loan back. You can do a loan back, and you can actually loan funds to your own sponsoring company. So I mentioned earlier on, to set up a SSAS, you need to have a sponsoring company. You need to have a current trading company, and that's called a sponsoring company. So as a SSAS trustee, HMRC give us an incredibly privileged opportunity for us to be able to invest our funds and loan them back to our sponsoring company. And we can get to choose some of the terms of that loan. It does have to be secured with a first charge. Normally, not always, but normally that's first charge on property. So that's the first thing to note. And the funds need to be on a commercial basis. And the lowest commercial rate basis is roughly 1% above base rate. It's slightly different calculation. It's 1% above the base rate of 6 average banks, rounded up to 0.25%. But for around about 1.25%, 1.5% per annum, that's an incredibly low cost of funds.
Really good.
Or you could have it at a higher rate of interest. And that's the point here. You can decide where you want the value. Do you want the value created outside of your SSAS, or do you want it created inside to increase the volume of your SSAS pension? The flexibility and the choice is yours. And Giuseppe, above anything else, it's that freedom of choice that I feel blessed with having our SSAS.
That's my slogan. I love it. Absolutely. There are a few things I want to clarify for whoever is watching this video. First of all, you mentioned about transferring from your existing pension into a SSAS. This is called the transfer value. You need to find out your transfer value first. You cannot do it with your state pension, but you can do it with your private pension. So anyone that has a job that is paying not only the national insurance contribution towards the state pension, you also might have another scheme, and you can check this on your payslip if you're paying an extra private pension, and that you can find out. You can ask them the transfer value of that pension, and then when you're ready to move it to a SSAS, then you will be surprised about that value. And I was surprised when I asked for mine. I had very, very little into mine, but the transfer value was, was allowing me to buy already a commercial property. So you will be surprised. And then you mentioned about leveraging first. It mentioned about you can leverage up to 50% or whatever is in the pot of your pension. So for example, if you have 100 in your pension, then you can have 150 available to buy commercial properties, not residential. So you can't do residential property with SSAS. And the third thing you mentioned was you can loan it to your company, to your sponsored company. Now, question for you: if you loan it to yourself, to your company, limited company, can you then buy residential properties?
Potentially, yes, you can. Yes, you need to put certain safeguards in place, and you need to make sure that the SSAS doesn't have interest directly in a residential property. So you would talk with your corporate trustee, and I would advise anybody who would be involved in any strategy to bring on a professional, whether that be a conveyancing solicitor or an accountant. Well, exactly the same for a SSAS. You want to have a specialist there. So I use a corporate trustee who understands the pension regulator manual, understands HMRC, and I will put certain scenarios to them. We'll debate and discuss what I'm going to use it for, and that's that statement of investment principles that we have in our business. So there are just, and I wrote the SSAS or Property and SSAS Secrets book, really, because there are just so many different permutations of what you can do, what you can't do. And it's the critical thought process that I find incredible,
Yeah.
because we're all different. We've all got different scenarios. Some people, their SaaS is everything they've got. Other people, they've got plenty of other assets outside of their SaaS, so they can take a degree of additional risk profiling possibly, or maybe less. So that's really important to acknowledge.
Yeah. I'm getting a bit more technical now. The last question about this SaaS is, when you use the limited liability partnership LLP, generally you use it because you can claim capital allowances on commercial properties if nobody else claimed it before, because you can only do it once in a lifetime. Now, once you have, I mean, if you want to buy through the pension, you cannot do it first in the pension because the pension is tax-free, so you cannot claim capital allowances, right?
Correct.
So if you buy first through the through the LLP, then you can do, I think it's called an in-specie transfer into your pension, which is like a physical transfer. Is that taxable as well? Or how does it work?
So yeah, so you see, an in specie is you're not reducing the asset to cash to sell it across. So you're transferring the ownership across, and that would be subject to usual taxes, stamp duty, land tax, for example, as a commercial transition. But it's looking at everything in the round. Everything in the round. I'll give you an example. We've just acquired a piece of land in Surrey, and it's got full planning permission for a new build commercial office block, be about 4,500 square feet. So everything I've just told you about that, you could say, well, Mark, you could have bought that in your SaaS, and we could. We had the funds available in cash to acquire that and build that in the SaaS, but we chose not to for a number of reasons. Just because you can get leverage in your SaaS doesn't mean it's easy to. There are a limited number of funders, so we didn't want to have an isolated asset in the SaaS that we'd have trouble getting leverage on. So that was one point. Secondly, with it being new build, we knew we could take a substantial amount of capital allowances. It's a brand new title. It's a piece of land, so there was no capital allowances that could have ever been taken before. So we could take the capital allowances on the new build, which is great. We couldn't have done that if it was in the SaaS, as you said before. So we will be doing, or we've acquired that now with a loan back. A loan back is generally a loan over a 5-year term, and you pay back capital and interest every year. So if you loan £100,000 for 5 years, you'll be paying £20,000 back at the end of the first year, second year, third year, etc., plus the level of interest that you allowed, be it 1.5%, 2% a year, whatever that is. So our strategy will be to buy in a limited company, take the capital allowances very effectively. We've got a group holding company structure anyway, so we can use sideways loss relief, and get a bit technical here, across all of our operating businesses, very technical. And then we'll also probably look at potentially a sale and lease back, because we'll be holding this commercial asset for many, many years, building a business. So we potentially could sell the asset into the SaaS. Could be through in specie, could be, we'll work that out. But probably once the tax efficiencies have depleted the capital allowances to a level. But that's where we do an annual review with our accountants, and we'll continue to do that and monitor the right position to then make any adjustments.
Yeah, that's brilliant. There are so many other advantages as well about using SaaS compared to stay on your private pension. One of them is you can draw the pension at 55 rather than wait until you're older, let's say. And then the other one is, if I'm not mistaken, the pension doesn't die with you, in a SaaS. So it stays with the trustees. So you have 11 people in, you can change the people, interchange them according if they get out or come in, and then it continues. So you never lose it compared to the private pension, right?
Yeah, I think it's, I know from personal experiences, I lost a very good friend at the age of 53. Pete passed away and he hadn't quite got his funds transferred into the SAS. And his wife, sadly, only got 50% of his pension.
Yeah.
And that's a real lesson to us all. And, you know, asking the tough questions in the good times is not a natural thing that people do. And how many of the country's population have ever asked the question to their pension advisor, you know, what happens if I die?
Yeah.
You know, we think about a pension being for us for our retirement, but the sad fact of life is that, you know, some, and in fact many, won't get to the pensionable age.
Yeah.
So it would be worthwhile understanding, well, does my pension transfer to my wife?
Yeah.
And for many, the answer will come back that if you die, your partner, your beneficiary, will get half, and if they die, the kids will get nothing.
That's gone.
And that probably isn't on the plan really for most people. So just asking the tough questions in the good times. um, and pension planning, when you've got a SAS in mind, it makes it exciting. You know, it's you know, the youngest person I know who's got a SAS pension is 19. This isn't for the preserve of the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. Although, you know, many people who I know are actually in that 30s, 40s, 50s demographic. But my children now know that you know, we can jump in the car and go and have a coffee in an asset that is owned by my pension. It gives them a very different feel for what pensions are, rather than the 25 years I had in corporate life of the pension was the statement that dropped on the doormat once a year and generally did not give me particularly great news.
No, no.
And since I left corporate life, in just one property transaction, just one, in a 2-year period, in 24 months, we doubled my pension that
Yeah.
had taken 24 years.
It,
That's the power if you know what you're doing.
it is powerful, absolutely. And it's unknown to the most. And I'm wondering, why is this? You know, for me, you know, I discovered pension a few years ago, but was not something I was planning at all to get into, to use pension to buy commercial properties. So why do you think is not so widely known?
Um, I'm not so sure I know the answer to that, to be honest. I think there's I don't think anybody's entitled to anything. So part of it is probably out of ignorance, that it's just not mainstream. Probably it's not in terms of fees. Some of the mainstream IFAs are going to make less fees out of that. So I've had tax advisors and IFAs for 25 years, and not a single one time ever did a SAS ever get brought up. So, you know, the lesson in life is, you know, there's phrases like an IFA and a project manager. There's 1,001 definitions. You know, you can have a surgeon, but you wouldn't have an eye surgeon operate on your heart. So, you know, just one phrase doesn't encapsulate all the skills that you need. So it's asking those tough questions in the good times, probe. And it was my probing and tenacity that revealed a little chink, a little glint. And I just kept digging away the soil around it and found, for me, and Assassi isn't for everybody. It won't work for everybody, but for me, it came at the right time in my life. And I suspect will come into my children's life, you know, once they become adults, and if it's something they want to do. So that's part of that multi-generational legacy, which I really value.
Love it. Thank you, Mark. One last question is about your future. What is your plan for the next 3, 6, 12 months?
So what's really passionate, something I'm passionate about, is I just mentioned building a multi-generational legacy. We are acquiring a lot of land at the moment, land to new build. We are pretty synonymous with commercial to residential conversions, and we help a lot of people and are doing a lot of those ourselves. But land to new build commercial and land to new build residential are something that we're increasingly focused on. All the land to new build homes, 2, 3 and 4 bedroom houses, we are holding. So we're building this real multi-generational juggernaut, which will keep in our family interest for many decades to come. And it's the curating and nurturing of the skills for our children to enable them to take on the good work we've done, to go on and do even better things with that. So I firmly believe there's no point in creating a legacy if you don't create and nurture the skills and the custodianship in our next generation. And that's why I wrote one of my books, Advice to Your Younger Self. I really want to pass on those skills to the next generation of my life. So spending more time with my family and those that are close to me to really enable that is one of my major passions.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. I think this has been a very, very valuable interview for many people that are watching. I want to thank you once again for coming to the interview. And I'm sure we will have a lot of questions in the comment about what we talked about today. And we are going to arrange another interview in the future. So please drop your questions below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe to this channel, because you're going to have all the notification about the new episodes. And I'm going to have you, Mark, in another episode, if that's okay for you.
It'd be my absolute pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Goodbye.